The universe is vast, uncaring, and profoundly stupid. This was the core tenet of systems engineer Elias Vance's personal philosophy. It wasn't nihilism, it was a practical observation. The universe, in its infinite, blithering idiocy, would constantly try to kill you in new and inventive ways. The trick was to be more stubborn, more inventive, and significantly more spiteful in your refusal to die. The initial lurch of the transport ship, the Stellar Concord, was the first hint that the universe was about to have another go. Alarms blared, a symphony of synthesized panic. Vance, strapped into his seat next to Dr. Eris Thorne, a biologist with an inappropriate amount of enthusiasm for the unknown, merely sighed. "Well," Vance said, his voice calm over the shrieking metal, "that doesn't sound ideal." Eris gripped his armrests, his knuckles white. "Define not ideal, Elias. The entire ship is shuddering like a wet dog in a blizzard." "Gravimetric shear," Vance grunted, watching the lights flicker. "We hit a pocket of something nasty. The pilot is fighting it, but the Glyth build their ships like elegant glassware. Looks great on a shelf, shatters if you sneeze too hard." Across the aisle, their two Glyth escorts were ramrod straight in their seats. The Glyth were a tall, insectoid species, all slender limbs and iridescent carapace. Their large, multifaceted eyes betrayed no emotion, but their antennae were twitching frantically, a dead giveaway of sheer terror. The senior of the two, Security Chief Xyler, had his three-fingered hands clenched so tight Vance thought he might crack his own exoskeleton. The younger one, Kalen, was making a soft chittering sound, the Glyth equivalent of a terrified whimper. "Human Vance," Xyler's voice was a series of resonant clicks and perfectly enunciated galactic standard. "Is this a standard occurrence on human vessels?" "Only on Tuesdays and when we're escorting dignitaries," Vance deadpanned. "Relax. We're either going to pull out of this, or we're going to be a very brief, very bright smear on the local space-time continuum. Either way, the worrying is over." Eris shot him a look. "Your bedside manner is appalling. We're not in bed." The final shriek of tortured metal was followed by a stomach-plummeting drop. The viewscreen, which had been a swirl of hyperspace blues and purples, was suddenly a horrifying mess of angry red and scorched rock. A planet, a very close, very angry planet. "Brace," Vance said, his voice losing its sarcastic edge for a fraction of a second. That was all the warning they got before the impact. It was less a crash and more a controlled disassembly. The ship skipped off the upper atmosphere like a flat stone, shedding sections of its hull, before plowing a long, ugly trench in the planet's surface. When it finally came to a stop, the silence was more deafening than the chaos that preceded it. Vance was hanging upside down, held in place by his restraints. He tasted blood. A quick mental checklist, all limbs responsive, vision blurry but clearing, headache like a personal percussion section. He unbuckled and dropped to the ceiling, which was now the floor, landing with a grunt that felt heavier than it should. 1.5 GS, Eris groaned from somewhere nearby. "Or thereabouts. My spleen feels like it wants to introduce itself to my kidneys." "Everyone sound off," Vance called out, his voice echoing in the ruined cabin. He triggered the emergency lighting, casting the scene in a harsh, chemical green. The sight was not encouraging. The front half of the ship was simply gone. A jagged tear in the hull opened up to a landscape of sharp, crystalline formations under a blood-red sky. "Thorne here," Eris managed, pushing himself up. "Bruised, angry, and my scientific curiosity is warring with a profound desire to curl up and cry." "Xyler," a crisp voice clicked. The Glyth security chief was already on his feet, his posture rigid despite a crack in his shoulder carapace that was oozing a faint blue fluid. "Kalen is unconscious, but his life signs are stable. The vessel is compromised." "Compromised is what you call it when the coffee machine is broken, Chief," Vance said, kicking a piece of debris out of his way. "This is what we in the human business call foobar." Xyler's antennae twitched in confusion. "Foobar, is that a technical designation?" "It is," Eris supplied, wiping a smear of dust from his face. "It stands for foundational understanding basically annihilated by reality. It's a state of profound systems failure." Vance shot him an appreciative grin. He always did like Eris's creative acronyms. He moved over to the jagged hole in the ship. The air that wafted in was thin and carried the scent of ozone and something metallic. A portable atmospheric sensor on his wrist beeped insistently. Atmosphere is a methane-nitrogen mix. Trace oxygen not enough to do us any good. Temperature is a balmy 5 degrees Celsius. Wear your helmets. He tapped his own neck ring and a transparent helmet shimmered into place. Aris did the same. He then tossed 2 emergency breathers to Xyler. Get one on your partner. They're not as good as a full helmet, but they'll keep his insides from becoming outsides. Xyler handled the breather with practiced efficiency, fitting it over Kalen's breathing spiracles. He then affixed his own. His voice came through their comms, tinny and strained. Our survival protocols dictate we remain within the most secure section of the wreckage and await rescue. The ship's beacon should have activated. Vance was already rummaging through a busted storage locker. Let me check on that for you. He pulled out a diagnostic tablet, its screen cracked but functional. He tapped at it for a moment, then let out a short, bark-like laugh. Good news and bad news. The distress beacon did activate. It sent one single pulse before the power conduit melted into a slag sculpture that vaguely resembles a sad face. So, no one is coming, Aris said, the forced optimism draining from his voice. Oh, they'll come eventually, Vance corrected, pulling out a heavy-duty power cable. They'll just be looking for a debris field, not survivors, which means we have, generously, a week before they move on. Less generously, we have about 6 hours before the ship's remaining life support gives out and the internal temperature matches the outside. Xyler stood still, a statue of disbelief. Our protocols are clear. We are to conserve energy and await rescue. Your protocols were written by people sitting in comfortable chairs on a nice, climate-controlled planet where the worst thing that happens is a lukewarm beverage, Vance shot back, not unkindly. He began yanking out power conduits and data cables from a wall panel. Our protocols, the unofficial human ones, are a bit different. They can be summarized as don't die. It's a bit more flexible. The ground beneath them vibrated, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that felt less like a tremor and more like a footstep. A very, very large footstep. What was that? Aris asked, his eyes wide. Vance paused his work, listening. I don't know, but on a planet that looks like this, it's probably not the welcome wagon. He pointed a thumb at the unconscious Kalen. You two get him secured. Aris, find the medkit and see to the chief's shoulder. I am going to see if I can convince this dead ship to give us one last parting gift. A place to hide. Over the next 3 hours, the humans worked with a frenetic energy that left Xyler utterly bewildered. He had seen emergency situations before, but they were handled with calm, procedural efficiency. This was different. This was controlled chaos. Vance moved like a man possessed, stripping the ship of anything not welded down. He cannibalized the emergency power cells, rerouting their charge not to life support, but to the deployment mechanism for the ship's inflatable emergency habitat. It's rated for vacuum, not for whatever this is, Aris pointed out as he applied a biocatalyst patch to Xyler's shoulder. The blue ooze slowed to a stop. Then we'll make it rated, Vance grunted, wrestling with a heavy sheet of hull plating. The crystalline dust out there will shred this thing in an hour. We need to armor it. Xyler watched, his training and instincts screaming at him to stop them, to enforce protocol. But he couldn't. He was an observer in his own survival scenario. He watched Vance jury-rig a plasma cutter, using it to shear off sections of the interior hull. He watched Aris collect samples of the local rock, analyzing their composition on his tablet. Fascinating, Aris murmured. It's a silicon-based crystal but with a ridiculously high tensile strength, almost like it's grown, not formed. This entire planet might be a single crystalline organism. Great. We crashed on a rock that's alive and probably very cranky about the new trench we plowed through its front yard, Vance said. Even more reason to get our tent set up. With a great hiss of compressed air, the emergency habitat inflated just outside the rupture in the hull. It was a sterile white dome in a world of red-black shards. Immediately, a wind picked up, and a fine, abrasive dust began to whip against the dome's thin skin, making a sound like a million tiny knives. See, shreds, Vance said. Aris, Chief, help me with these plates. Together, they awkwardly wrestled the heavy metal sheets out of the ship, and using magnetic clamps salvaged from the cargo bay, began to affix them to the dome. It was brutal, exhausting work in the heavy gravity. Xyler, even with his superior strength, found his muscles screaming in protest. Vance and Aris, however, just kept going, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and what Xyler could only interpret as pure, unadulterated stubbornness. Their banter never ceased. "You know," Aris panted, slamming a clamp into place, "if we survive this, I'm going to write a scathing paper on glyph engineering." "If we survive this," Vance countered, "I'm billing their government for consulting fees. Hostile environment improvisation is a premium service." By the time they were done, the dome was an ugly, patchwork beast of white fabric and scorched metal plates, but it was solid. They moved Kalen inside, along with scavenged supplies, nutrient packs, a water reclaimer, and the precious power cells. The last thing Vance did before sealing the inner airlock was rip the ship's primary chronometer off the wall. Inside, the dome was cramped and smelled of ozone and recycled air. Kalen was stirring, his antennae twitching weakly. The thrumming vibration from outside started again, closer this time. "Right on schedule," Vance muttered, looking at the chronometer. "It's getting dark. The temperature is dropping like a stone." "What is that noise?" Kalen chittered, his voice weak. Before anyone could answer, a screech echoed from outside, a horrifying sound of metal being torn apart. It was followed by a series of heavy, crunching impacts against their makeshift armor. Xyler instinctively reached for a pulse rifle that wasn't there. "What is it?" "Our new neighbor," Aris said, his face pale. He was looking at a portable seismograph he'd salvaged. "It's big and it's right outside. It seems to be investigating the wreckage." Vance was fiddling with a salvaged comms panel, a wicked grin on his face. "It's drawn to the ship's energy signature. And vibrations. I'm willing to bet it hunts by vibration." "You seem entirely too pleased with this deduction," Xyler stated, his logical mind struggling to process the human's attitude. They were trapped in a flimsy shelter on an alien world, being stalked by an unknown predator, and Vance looked like he'd just solved a fun puzzle. "Because if we know how it hunts, we know how to annoy it," Vance said. He finished his wiring and held up a small device with an antenna. "I rerouted the ship's main comms emitter. It's got its own power source, should last a few hours. I'm going to go stick this about 500 meters away from us and tune it to a frequency that should vibrate the ground like a jackhammer. It'll either draw the creature away or give it a splitting headache." "You intend to go outside?" Xyler's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That is an unacceptable risk." "What's unacceptable is being a canned dinner," Vance retorted, grabbing the plasma cutter. "Look, your way is to sit here and hope for the best. My way is to punch the universe in the nose until it gives us some breathing room. Aris, you're on door duty. Don't let me back in if I have extra limbs." He sealed his helmet, cycled the airlock, and disappeared into the howling, crystalline dusk. Inside the dome, there was a tense silence broken only by the hum of the recycler and the scraping sounds from outside. Xyler found himself standing guard, a useless posture, while Aris monitored the seismograph. "His heart rate is elevated but steady," Aris said, more to himself than to the glyph. "He does this. He runs on spite. The universe tells him to lie down and die, and he takes it as a personal insult." Xyler's multifaceted eyes watched the inner airlock door. He had been trained to face down pirates, insurgents, and assassins. He had protocols for every conceivable combat scenario, but there was no protocol for this. No protocol for a species that treated a death world as an inconvenient problem to be solved with scrap metal and sheer nerve. He had always viewed humans as garrulous, fragile, and overly emotional. He was beginning to suspect he had profoundly misjudged them. The scraping stopped. A new, deep, resonant hum started up from a distance, pulsing in a steady rhythm. On the seismograph, Aris pointed to a new set of readings. "That's the emitter. It's working." A moment later, the larger vibrations, the ones from the creature, began to move away from them, towards the new sound. Aris let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The airlock cycled. Vance stumbled back inside, covered in red dust, his helmet retracted. He was grinning. "Let's call them tremor stalkers," he announced, dusting himself off. 6 legs, armored carapace, and a face only a mother could love if she were a sentient rockslide. It really didn't like the high-frequency vibrations. went after the emitter like it owed it money. He looked at the two glyph. Kalen was staring at him with undisguised awe. Xyler's expression was unreadable, but his antennae were perfectly still. "So," Vance said, clapping his hands together, "that buys us a few hours. Who wants a nutrient paste that tastes vaguely of chicken-flavored despair?" The rescue came 6 days later. 6 days of listening to Vance's terrible jokes, watching Eris classify impossibly dangerous flora and fauna with childlike glee, and actively participating in their insane, protocol-defying survival strategies. They had built a perimeter of seismic decoys. They had figured out how to use the ship's broken water condenser to pull the trace moisture from the thin atmosphere, generating a liter of water a day. Eris had even identified a crystalline growth that, when superheated with the plasma cutter, produced a small amount of oxygen. They had not merely survived. They had, in a small, ugly, and defiant way, tamed a tiny corner of their hell. When the Glyph rescue vessel landed, its crew in pristine environmental suits looked in horror at the makeshift camp. The commanding officer approached Xyler. "Chief Xyler, by the great architect, we thought you were lost. We tracked the beacon's single pulse. We expected only to recover your logs." Xyler looked from the pristine officer to Vance, who was currently arguing with Eris about whether or not he could take a pet rock back with him. He then looked at the ugly, armored dome that had been their home. "Our survival," Xyler said, his voice resonating with a new, strange timbre, "was not a matter of protocol. It was a matter of malicious compliance with the environment." The officer looked confused. Xyler did not elaborate. Aboard the rescue ship, a sleek, sterile vessel that felt like a palace after their hovel, Xyler formally approached the two humans. Kalen stood behind him, shifting his weight nervously. "On behalf of the Glyph Collective and my junior officer," Xyler began, bowing his head slightly, "I offer our profound and eternal gratitude. You saved our lives." Vance waved a dismissive hand. "Don't mention it. The bill is already on its way to your government. I included a surcharge for emotional distress and exposure to bad scenery." Eris chuckled. "What he means to say is, we're glad you're okay, Xyler." "Indeed," Xyler said. "I have filed my preliminary report. I confess I found it difficult to accurately describe your methods. My superiors are skeptical." "Tell them we used the power of friendship and positive thinking," Vance said with a straight face. "I will not," Xyler replied, a strange inflection in his voice that might have been the Glyph equivalent of dry humor. "I told them your species' primary survival trait appears to be a form of weaponized optimism, and that you treat the laws of physics less as rules and more as gentle suggestions." Before Vance could come up with a suitably sarcastic reply, a new alarm began to chime. It was a soft, melodic sound, far less panicked than the one on the Stellar Concord, but no less ominous. The ship shuddered, not violently, but with a deep, sickening lurch. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the same cold, green emergency lighting. Vance and Eris exchanged a long, weary look. "You have got to be kidding me," Eris whispered. Vance just closed his eyes. "The universe," he said to the ceiling, "is not only stupid, it's a hack, it's repeating plot points." The ship's captain came over the intercom, his voice strained. "Attention. We have experienced a catastrophic failure in the jump drive core following our exit from the anomaly. We are not in controlled flight. Brace for impact." Xyler looked at the humans. His antennae drooped. "This is not a standard occurrence, is it?" "It's starting to be," Vance sighed, strapping himself into a crash couch. "Hold on to your carapaces, gentlemen. Looks like we're going camping again." The second crash was a different kind of violence. Less tearing metal, more a long, sickening slide into something soft and yielding. The ship groaned as it settled, tilting at a precarious angle. The impact was jarring but not catastrophic. When the motion stopped, the first thing they noticed was the smell. It was a thick, cloying stench of rot, wet earth, and something vaguely floral. The second thing was the sound, a constant, rhythmic dripping. Water was already seeping through a dozen new fractures in the hull, pooling on the canted floor. Green, bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting the dark interior in an ethereal, sickly glow. "Okay," Eris said, unbuckling himself. His voice was a low whisper. "This is new." Vance was already at a viewport, wiping away the condensation. Outside, there was no red, crystalline desert. There was only a forest of what looked like giant, pulsating mushrooms, shrouded in a perpetual, drizzling twilight. The air was thick with mist and spores that swirled like lazy snowflakes. "Gravity is .9 standard," Vance reported, checking his wrist sensor. "Atmosphere is breathable. High oxygen, high humidity, and a whole cocktail of airborne organics I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw them. Welcome to the big, soggy disappointment." Xyler and Kalen had fared better this time, their larger frames absorbing the impact more easily. But the psychological blow was immense. Kalen was chittering again, a high-pitched sound of pure despair. "Twice," Kalen clicked, his limbs trembling. "Twice we have fallen from the sky. The universe wishes us erased." "The universe is an overgrown toddler throwing a tantrum," Vance said, his voice hard. "And we are not its favorite toy. Aris, what do you make of our new fungal overlords?" Aris had already taken a sample of the water seeping into the ship. He placed a drop on his tablet's sensor. His eyes widened. "It's teeming with microbial life. And the spores, Elias, some of these are corrosive. Not fast, but they'll eat through a suit's seals in a few hours. Others are, well, the preliminary scan suggests they're potent hallucinogens." "So the air is poison and the rain makes you see pink elephants," Vance summarized. "Fantastic. At least the gravity won't be trying to turn our bones to powder." Xyler, drawing on some deep reserve of professional duty, took charge of the other Glyth survivors. There were a half-dozen others, mostly dazed and injured crew members. He established a triage center in the driest part of the ship, his voice crisp and authoritative once more. But as he worked, he kept glancing at the humans. They hadn't panicked. They hadn't despaired. They had immediately and without discussion shifted into problem-solving mode. "First things first," Vance declared, pointing at the water. "We can't drink this. It'll probably make us grow a second head. We need a distiller. Ship's medical bay should have the components. Second, air filtration. Those spores are a no-go. We need to rig a scrubber system for whichever part of this wreck we decide to call home." "The ship systems are dead," one of the Glyth engineers reported, his antennae drooping. "The impact and the water, everything is shorted out." "We don't need the ship systems," Vance said, grabbing a toolkit. "We just need its guts." What followed was a repeat of the first survival scenario, but with a horrifying new set of variables. The planet wasn't actively trying to kill them with geology, it was trying to kill them with biology. It was a subtle, creeping death. Aris became the linchpin of their survival. He identified which of the glowing fungi were merely toxic, and which were lethally poisonous. He discovered that a particular type of moss, when boiled, neutralized the corrosive spores, creating a paste they could use to reinforce the seals on their clothing. He was in his element, a kid in the universe's most dangerous candy store. "The biodiversity here is staggering," he exclaimed one cycle, holding up a piece of slimy fungus. "This specimen appears to be a chemoautotroph, drawing energy from the mineral-rich mud. It's disgusting, but it's also probably edible." Vance, who was busy rewiring a pump to create a rudimentary water distillation system, looked over. "Define probably." "Well, it's not immediately fatal to the local insect analogs," Aris said cheerfully. "That's the slogan we'll put on the packaging. Glow goo, not immediately fatal," Vance shot back. He turned to Xyler, who was watching them with his usual expression of stoic confusion. "See, Chief, dinner and a show." The most terrifying aspect of the new world revealed itself on the third cycle. It was a sound, a faint, lilting melody that seemed to drift through the fungal forest. It sounded like a Glyth distress call. Kalen's head snapped up. "Did you hear that? Survivors. There must be another group." He started towards the main hatch, his movements eager. Vance tackled him, bringing him down to the deck with a heavy thud. "Nobody moves," Vance ordered, his voice a low growl. "Let go of me, human. Our people are out there," Kalen struggled. "That's not your people," Aris said, his face grim. He pointed at a large, pulsating mushroom just visible through the viewport. It was vibrating gently, and the melody seemed to be emanating from it. "It's a fungus, a lure. It's mimicking sounds it's heard." As if to prove his point, the melody shifted, becoming a perfect replica of Vance's voice calling for help. A cold dread settled over the survivors. The planet wasn't just hostile, it was intelligent in a predatory, insidious way. "From now on," Vance said, letting Kalen up, "we trust nothing we hear. Eyes only. We communicate by hand signals when outside the ship. This place cheats." The Glyth were terrified. Their culture was based on clear communication, on the sanctity of the spoken word. A world that used sound as a weapon was a concept straight from their deepest nightmares. For the humans, however, it was just another problem. Annoying, dangerous, but a problem nonetheless. Their greatest challenge came a week in. The lower levels of the ship, submerged in the thick, black bog water, had attracted a new form of life. It was a massive, amphibious predator Eris dubbed a grave gator, a creature of armored plates and a wide, tooth-filled maw that was drawn to the faint electrical signals still bleeding from the ship's hull. It began ramming the weakened fuselage, trying to break its way in. The impacts shook the entire wreck, sending terrified Glyth scattering. "It's going to break through," an engineer shrieked. "The hull integrity in that section is at 12%. "We have no heavy weapons," Xyler stated, the grim finality in his voice. Vance was already moving. He grabbed the plasma cutter he'd salvaged from the first crash, a tool he now considered his lucky charm and a portable breather. "Eris, you and Xyler get everyone to the highest point in the ship. Seal the hatch behind you." "Elias, what are you going to do?" Eris demanded. "I'm going to go outside and politely ask him to leave," Vance said, his face set in a grim mask. "The water will diffuse the plasma beam, but if I can get close enough, the heat should be enough to scare it off. It's a big lizard. Big lizards don't like being boiled." "That is suicide," Xyler protested. "The water is full of microbial agents. The creature will tear you apart." "And staying here is group suicide, which is less efficient," Vance countered, strapping on the power pack. "I'll take my chances." "Now go." He slipped out through a maintenance airlock into the murky, foul-smelling water. The world became a silent, green-tinged nightmare. He could feel the vibrations of the massive creature nearby. He saw its huge, dark shape moving through the gloom. It was bigger than he'd thought. Much bigger. He activated the plasma cutter. It hissed to life, a blade of pure energy that turned the water in front of it into a cloud of steam. The creature turned, its rows of primitive eyes fixing on the light. It charged. Inside the ship, Xyler watched the viewport. He saw the flash of light, the violent roil of the water. He saw the human, a tiny, insignificant figure, charge towards a monster out of legend. It was illogical. It was insane. It was magnificent. The creature shrieked, a sound that penetrated the hull as the intense heat of the plasma beam met its flank. It thrashed, its powerful tail slamming into Vance, sending him spinning through the water. His light went out. "He is down," Kalen whispered. Xyler did not hesitate. He had spent his entire life following protocols, adhering to the logical path. In that moment he threw it all away. "Open the hatch," he commanded the Glyth engineer. "But Chief, your orders." "Now," Xyler roared. He plunged into the murky water, his powerful limbs propelling him forward. He found Vance unconscious, his breather knocked askew. The grave gator, wounded and enraged, was circling back. Xyler grabbed the human suit, tucked him under one arm, and kicked for the airlock, a primal terror giving him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He hauled Vance inside just as the hatch was sealed, the creature's snout slamming against the metal an instant later. Vance coughed up foul water, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Xyler, the towering Glyth dripping bog water over him. "Did we win?" Vance rasped. A sound came from Xyler. It was a low, rumbling series of clicks, a sound Eris later identified as the Glyth equivalent of a laugh. "Yes, human Vance," Xyler said. "We won." They were rescued 3 weeks later. The second rescue party found them not huddled in a wreck, but thriving. They had established a fortified camp, with a working water purifier, an air scrubber, and a perimeter of sonic emitters Eris had designed to repel the chorus fungi. They had a sustainable food source in the form of the roasted, and surprisingly tasty, glow goo. They were gaunt, filthy, and exhausted, but they were alive. All of them. Xyler's final report to the Glyth High Command was flagged for review 3 times due to its unconventional and potentially blasphemous language. He sat in a sterile debriefing room, the clean, recycled air a stark contrast to the living, breathing miasma of the world he had left behind. "Let me be clear, counselors," Xyler's voice resonated through the chamber. He stood before the holographic projections of his superiors. We survived not because of glyph technology, we survived not because of our training. Both failed us, twice. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We survived because we had the profound misfortune and the unearned blessing of crashing with two humans. He described the events on both worlds. He spoke not of bravery or heroism, but of a force he could only define as a kind of cosmic defiance. They do not accept unfavorable conditions. They rewrite them. They see a death world not as a final sentence in the way we do, but as a hostile negotiation. They will bargain, they will cheat, they will break the rules, and they will use scrap metal and sheer, infuriating nerve to force the environment to concede. He looked at the faces of the counselors, their antennae twitching with skepticism. We were prey waiting for the end. The humans, I have come to realize, are always predators. If they do not have a tool, they will build one. If they do not have a solution, they will invent one. Their greatest resource is not their intelligence, but their refusal to ever be the victim. They are driven by something we barely comprehend. They call it many things, but the term engineer Vance used most often, the one I believe is most accurate, is spite. A counselor leaned forward. You are suggesting a species is motivated by a petty emotion. I am suggesting, Xyler corrected, that their spite is not petty, it is a cosmological force. They look upon an uncaring universe that seeks to crush them, and they take it as a personal insult. It is this trait that makes them the most terrifying and the most valuable species I have ever encountered. His final words hung in the silent chamber, a warning and a testament. We study the void and chart the anomalies. Humans see an obstacle and chart a path through it. We have sought to adapt to the universe. Humans, it seems, expect the universe to adapt to them. I do not recommend we ever become their enemies. For I have seen them in their element, and their element is impossibility. They are the persistence predators, and they hunt for the one thing the universe cannot take from them: one more day.